Good morning, everyone. My talk is about the history of cryonics, and since I have not been as long in this history as some other people in the room, I needed some tool to analyze the history of cryonics. And I chose, for now, as a first piece, the Cryonics Magazine and narrative analysis of what we can find in this magazine. The outline, I'll pose a research question, introduce the material and method and how I did it, and then put out some key findings and an outlook and conclusion where this could lead to and what this brings us. It's quite a different spin than what we had before. The research question is, what do cryonicists write for cryonicists to read? And what can we learn from that? What is coming out of this? And what should everyone who's coming to this community or who's interested in this learn from the past? Material and method, I used the Cryonics Magazine the last 10 years only. In total, that's 49 issues, which are freely available on the Alko website with 1,414 pages. And I filtered it to 372 articles on 967 pages, taking out all the material that is redundant, like membership applications and what is the name of Alko about and all of this, which would have changed the statistics quite substantially. A narrative analysis is a qualitative method, rather, traditionally used to research how people create meaning in their lives as narratives. How do they define themselves? And here adapted to research on how chronicists create meaning for cryonics as narratives in their writings. I put categories on the articles and counted the pages. So we have a percentage of the pages by the topic. One of the largest here is the 24.3% organizational. This is mainly CEO updates, and in the beginning I also chose that that profiles of Alko members would also be rather organizational because they introduce themselves. But this is quite a substantive part, and in redoing the analysis I would probably take them separately. What it tells us is that chronicists really like to learn something about other chronicists, that they are not alone in this. The technology, 10.65%, is not as much as I thought. There's about main things are the tech news, which is a lot of small blurbs, which would be worthwhile to have an analysis in themselves, because when I read them from 2004, they sound overly optimistic, and they seem to prove that we see the future too optimistically in hindsight, and that this is a practice that could be thought about. It's interesting that this section is, I thought it's in every single magazine, but for 2 years this disappeared and it wasn't in the magazine. It would be interesting to know from people who were involved and why they chose to delete it and then bring it back. Chronicists are bookworms. 6.4% of the pages are book reviews on cryonics and related topics. They also want to know quite a bit about cryonics cases, how it went, and quite a substantive part is dedicated to case reports, more than 8%. And if we add this together with the reports or the presentations on cryopreservation, we reach a similar number as the organizational aspects. So case reports on how cryopreservation really works, and improvements in cryopreservation and explanations of cryopreservations, how that works, is about 24% as well. The next part, and that's the main focus of my talk, is the history part. And it's interesting that there are some cases, events that get reprinted every couple of years, apparently, because they have some special importance. Under other, there's a number of different things included in this category. There's only one single article which surprised me on religion, 0.31% of the pages. I thought, since it's coming up so much in talks, that it must be in almost every second magazine, but actually it's not such a big topic. There's something on events, like symposia like this one. There's here and there something on aging and immortality and Aubrey's work, but it's not as prominent as I thought. Legal aspects, also less than 5%. My cut line was 5%. Everything is less than 5% went into the other category. Outreach, how to communicate cryonics. Reanimation, the singularity, transhumanism, all these topics that come up in almost every single meeting of cryonicists are rather small in these magazines. What I find noteworthy, which is but a very, very small aspect, I also found 2 poems in these magazines of 10 years, which I also did not really expect. I would like to highlight 3 prominent historic events. 1971 Cryonics Conference. There's a history article about this conference from 71 in the magazine, or in this 10-year period of the magazine, which says that since 1963 there are basically Cryonics conferences in one form or another. And this one was especially interesting, or struck me as interesting, because in the preparation I knew already which speakers are invited. And one of yesterday's speakers already gave a presentation at 1971 conference, Dr. Peter Guras, on development of improved human cryopreservation protocols. So there is really people around that have been given presentations in 71 and are still active in 2014. And I think there's a wealth of things to learn from them if we take the time. The second one that came up quite prominently was what is referred to as Chatsworth Disaster. There was a rather long article that was quite striking, which was in 1979, where 9 patients were thought and lost, and similar but less drastic cases of suspension failures were reported in the early years, mainly the end of the 60s until the end of the 70s and maybe early 80s. And overall, there are 17 documented freezings by different organizations through 1973, of which all but 1 ended in failure, or maybe 5 or 6 later cases. Some of them privately maintained were later terminated, very often running out of funding. There was no more money available. Someone was overly optimistic on how much work he can do and how much resources he can bring up, meaning well, but not being able to sustain the procedures. And then there's a case in the history of Alko, which came up quite prominently, the Dora Kent case, the year 1988, where there was someone declared, or the procedure started when the cryonics procedures, when no physician was around, and the absence of a physician who could pronounce the dead legally started the coroner's investigation, and it was reported that this one turned increasingly hostile towards cryonics. There was accusation of homicide and practicing medicine without a license. Alko staff was taken out of the premises in handcuffs. The place was raided. Computers were seized. So it was quite a big thing at that point. Although all the accusations were withdrawn in court, or in the end proved not to be correct. But at that point, it was quite drastic, and it would have had potential to interrupt the procedures and the working ability of Alko. There's another smaller case in the same year, Robert Binkowski, and at that time this was the first whole body patient of Alko, and it made, in the eyes of the officials, made Alko look like a mortuary or cemetery for which there was no license, which is, if you look into the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, nobody had anticipated that problem because they thought we get a donation of the body and we are safe. But at that point there was also problems made by the authorities because it was new and they thought this is in our district and we're responsible for this. And first we don't think this is feasible. Also another case that Alko won, and there were no dire consequences from this, but something to remember. The outlook, quickly. This is a very, very quick summary of 967 pages, but overall the study is still rather small and covering only 10 years. It's limited to 1 magazine. There are other magazines of the Cryonics Institute. There is material available from other organizations that no longer exist, from mailing lists and printed materials. At this point, I would like to thank Ben Bast for making a very, very nice summary on his homepage that I think should be a must-read for everyone. And I would also like to thank Mike Perry, who has been instrumental in helping me with this study and who is supporting me with other material that is not easily available. But unfortunately, it didn't arrive in time here. He sent it out more than 6 weeks ago on DVD because it's such a wealth of material. So it will be rather for the next symposium when I find time to analyze this one. Another study that would be quite interesting is trends and changes over time. How does it change? In the early 2000s, Alko called it cryotransport, not cryopreservation. The term was changed, and it's not really clear why. The topics were partly changed, and also comparisons between sources. Is there a different way Alko reports in the Alko magazine than CI reports in their magazine? The lessons learned, and I think these are especially important for Europe because we are in kind of a similar point as the Americans were in the 70s, and it's quite important not to learn from their mistakes and not do them again in Europe. They have learned that small formal mistakes can have dire consequences, and even if they are not mistakes, it just looks suspicious, it can be a real problem for the organization and be a threat to the organization and the patients. In most cases of failed suspensions, the level of funding was limited and inadequate. The resources were not available to sustain. There was no planning, no financial plan, and it was not thought through on how these operations could be sustained. Overall, we have a wealth of information and experiences to draw upon, and also people to interview and get their opinion on how we can start without doing the same things again. And I think it's absolutely critical to find a way to unlock this information and make it available for new members in order not to get the same ideas over and over again that failed already in the 70s. And another lesson learned, and here I would like to quote Mike Perry, who wrote, I think he's one of the most ample writers, I didn't include this data here, of the Cryonics Magazine. He has wrote about 25% of the pages in this over the last 10 years. And one of his conclusions is we must keep doing what we are doing, keep trying to do it better, and look for ways and opportunities to interest others. And that's my quick summary of 10 years Cryonics Magazine, and I thank you for your attention.